Some journeys take us beyond the edge of life and back again. Real people, real stories. They've crossed the veil and touched the other side, revealing deeper truths about who we are and why we're here. Welcome back, and welcome to The Returned.
Today, I would like to welcome our guest, Aaron Thomas Green, who had a powerful near-death experience at the age of 6 years old, where he recalls leaving his body, reliving his life, and entering higher realms. His journey includes a life review, visions of the past and future lives, and even a glimpse into the pre-birth planning, revealing why he chose to come to Earth. Welcome to The Returned.
My name's Aaron Green. Shortly before my 6th birthday, I had a near-death experience. I was playing with some friends in a neighbor's backyard with my brother and maybe 5 or 6 other neighborhood friends. And I don't know exactly what happened, but somehow I developed a breathing problem. I couldn't take a breath no matter what I did. I just couldn't breathe. I'm not exactly sure what caused that, but I was getting very upset and I was having trouble. And I thought I need to go home. Maybe I can get some help. So I started walking towards home. And I got maybe 20 steps away, something like that. The breathing problem triggered something. It triggered like the release of my consciousness, the release of my soul. I didn't pass out, but I literally left my body. Whatever it is I really am, my soul, my consciousness, my thoughts, all of it, it left my body. And I watched as my body fell to the ground. I was kind of like floating there above my body and I could see it laying there on the ground. I looked back at my friends and they were still doing what they had been doing. And they didn't notice that my body was laying there, and they definitely didn't notice my soul floating there, but I could see them. And immediately I had a couple of realizations. One was that, wow, I'm not this body. I'm something different than this body. That was just immediately obvious. It was crystal clear. And like, I could feel that the time was different. Like the flow of time was somehow different. And I could like literally feel that. And also I had like recollection that I had been like this before. This isn't the first time I'd existed like that as an independent consciousness outside of the body. There was like a familiarity to it that I recognized. And a couple things happened very quickly with no conscious action on my part. Almost immediately, my entire life flashed in front of me very quickly. I'd say like less than a second, but I don't know if that's even accurate, but very fast. And a couple things really stood out. One was that not only did I re-experience my feelings and thoughts and relive the actions I had, but I could like literally feel the impact I had on those around me, which was primarily my parents, just being a 6-year-old at that time. And a couple of things stood out from the feelings I was like I could feel my parents' feelings. And a couple of things really stood out. One was that my mother loved me. Like it really stood out. That was important. That love she had for me. She was a good mom and she took care of me and loved me and connected with me. That had a deeper significance. So it was more important than just a trivial interaction. And that it was like, it was self-evident. And then also my father, he's a good father and he's loving. But what really stood out to me was the frustration he had at raising a baby of me and my brother. The realization that it was changing the relationship with my mom. Things were different. Certain things were more difficult. And I could see that. I didn't really, as a kid, I wouldn't have really understood that. But as a soul outside of my body, it was crystal clear. The frustration I could see from changing diapers and dealing with a screaming child, like I could feel that and understand it perfectly. Anyway, when that ended, it felt to me like I had done very little in my life. Like I was very young and all the decisions I had made up to that point were almost like trivial and unimportant. And it seemed really short, but like 6 years of life was next to nothing. That's how it felt anyway. And then when that was over, I was still just floating there and I noticed kind of like a light in the distance. And I knew there was something really important about that light. There was a significance to it. And it's like I semi-remembered it, but I couldn't quite place it or understand why it was important. And so I didn't continue to focus on it. So I just kept floating around, moving around my neighborhood's backyard. Anyway, I started to have questions. And as I would have questions, it was like the answers came to me in extreme clarity. It was like I would re-experience something I had experienced prior, but I had forgotten while I was living this life. And one of the first questions I had was like, what am I? I knew I was independent from this body, different, but I didn't understand what I was like, what am I? And I could see myself. It was like I was able to see what I looked like, and I was just a round orb of consciousness with a faint but very noticeable light coming from within. And that's just how I existed. It's just like an orb of consciousness, like a ball of light. And there were some complexities to it I didn't quite understand. That's the gist of it, just like a round ball of light. Anyway, I had another question. I wanted to know, where did I come from? What am I doing here on this planet? Like, what's going on? That kind of thing. And so what I call a spiritual memory, something that had happened to me previously, it all replayed for me in extreme detail. And this was all stuff that had happened before. I'd just forgotten about it as I was living this life as Aaron. Anyway, it began, I was an orb of light, just like I was there. And I was with hundreds or thousands of other orbs of light. We were all together in what I would call a sea of light. It was very bright. We were all happy and content. We were kind of like friends with each other, but we were ignorant. We didn't know anything. We didn't have any background, or we were happy, but we didn't know or care about anything. And periodically we would get these gifts, like a treat would come down. And as a kid, it reminded me of getting a cookie, something that's nice to have, but you certainly don't have to have it. And there would be one treat for every soul. One time there was one fewer treat than there were souls in this group. And we all recognized it. We all knew that. And I made the conscious decision that all these other souls are just like me and they want to get the treat also. So I'm just going to let them have it because I know that they want it. And when the last treat came to the last other soul, I was very gently lifted up out of this group. And the care with which I was treated was really noticeable. And I think it really paints a picture of who our Creator is. The gentleness and the care with which I was lifted was very noticeable. And this higher level consciousness contacted me, like mind-to-mind communication, like telepathic communication. And it basically said that it was my Creator and that I was very much loved and cared for, and that I was very important, and not just me, but all these other souls, we were all very important. And that what I had done, giving up what I wanted for the benefit of those around me, was very important. And it meant that I was ready to begin a process to start something. I'll just call my Creator God for simplicity. And God communicated that essentially there was a wonderful existence in store for me and for all these other souls. There was just an absolutely wonderful, I guess I would say, life or existence or experience that was ahead for us. But in order for us to fully appreciate that, we had to go through like an education, or we had to learn some stuff. And essentially what God explained is that God is loving, compassionate, kind, honest, caring, gentle, respectful, forgiving, all these traits, all these positive traits. That's what God is. That's who God is. And we were created with free will. We're created ignorant, but with free will, and we can do whatever we want to. And that's how God wants it. It doesn't really convey as I try to explain it, but our free will, our ability to make our own decisions, that was hugely important. That's a core aspect of our very creation. And God's not going to force us here or there or force us to do one thing or another thing. But in order for us to enjoy our existence, we need to freely choose those traits for ourselves. We need to freely choose to be kind, compassionate, honest, to act with integrity, help other people, that kind of thing. And that God had created an experience for us where we would naturally learn those traits. We would learn the benefits of helping others, and we would learn like the problems, the downsides of hurting other people. And the confidence that God had about this plan, like you could feel it, like God's confidence was immense, and God was absolutely positive that this was a good plan, that it was going to be worth it. God understood that it was going to be difficult, but God was absolutely sure this was a good plan. And basically he conveyed that this is going to be very short. This is a very short experience, a very short amount of time, so to speak, that we're going to have to go through some difficult stuff. And then we can enjoy an eternity of happiness kind of thing. We get the difficult stuff out of the way very quickly, and then we're in paradise and we can really enjoy ourselves. That's the gist of it. And so I asked God, couldn't you just change me and make me how I need to be so I don't need to go through this difficult experience, this education? Like, why don't you just change me and make me the way I need to be? And God's response was that, yes, absolutely. He was fully capable of changing me and anybody else to make us however we want it to be. But to do so would violate one of the core reasons we were created in the first place. And so God wasn't going to do that. We had to do it the hard way because God didn't want to violate our free will. God wanted us to be able to make our own decisions, and that's just how it all worked. And God was absolutely confident that's the best way, and that's just the way it needed to be. And so I agreed. I was like, okay, I guess that makes sense. And so then God asked me if I wanted to see his face. And I agreed, and my attention turned. I had been looking at all these souls I was with, and my attention turned, and I was facing a huge sun-like entity, looked like a sun, only there was like millions and millions of souls that were all in there together, and you can see their face. So it was kind of like a sun, but with millions and millions of little faces that were all together and very happy. And some of these souls, they kind of took their attention off of what they were doing, and they like came to the surface to say hi to me, to welcome me into existence. And they were all very happy. And they were excited that I was beginning this process because they knew that I would join them. And they said that eventually I would join them. And when I did, it would add something to their happiness. There was something irreplaceable about me. There was something that I could contribute that no other soul could contribute. And that's true with me, but it's true with everyone else also, that for every soul that comes and joins them, we're going to add something. We're going to bring something to the mix that no other soul can replicate. And when we do, it will increase the happiness of everyone who's already there. So they're all excited just by that little bit extra happiness that I would be able to add. And they assured me that eventually I would get there, that I would come and join them, that they had already been through this process, and they were excited that I would be with them someday. Anyway, God asked me, one final time, it was like, are you sure you're willing to go through this difficult process? And I agreed and said, yes, I'm sure I'll go through it. And it was like, bam, I was moving away from the scene very quickly. I don't know, light speed, just zooming away from that into some kind of other reality. And I still had like mental communication, telepathic communication with God. And we started looking at all these different planets. It was like just countless opportunities or places that I could go and get the education I needed. And we went through, I don't know, it had to be thousands and thousands. And at the time, I could see very clearly what things were like on these planets. And I don't remember any of these kind of details, but it was all the same idea. It was a place I could go and get the experiences that I needed to grow as a soul and learn what I needed to learn. But eventually we got to Earth, and there was something about this planet and being a human and this life. It fit perfectly for me. Like it just felt like everything was perfect. This is where I want to go. And I was absolutely positive, which is interesting because that's different than my personality now. But anyway, I was positive. This is the planet. This is where I want to go. And God asked me one final time, are you sure? And when I said, yes, I'm sure, it's like that made it, the decision was final. And that's where I was going. And so that memory that I just described, that answered the question that I had about where I came from and why I was on Earth. So at that point, then it's like I'm back floating around my neighbor's backyard, just wandering around aimlessly, trying to understand what was going on. And so then I had another question. I wanted to know, okay, I understand where I came from and why I'm on this planet, but why am I Aaron? What's going on? Why am I this person? Like, how did that happen? And so again, I relived this experience that I had previously in extreme detail that answered my question. And when this experience started out, I was like, I had been through a lot. Okay. The first memory described, I was like a new soul. I was new. I hadn't experienced anything, but now this time it was clear that I was a much more experienced soul. Like I had been through a lot. Okay. But I was frustrated. I was in like rough shape. I was what I would call mentally disheveled. I was a little bit confused, but not so confused that I didn't know what was going on. But it's like I'd been through something really difficult and I was a mess. And there was guides that were helping me. They were trying to get me back on the right track. It was clear that I had made some mistakes. I had done something that I considered wrong, and I just wasn't in a good place. And the guides wanted me to go back to Earth. And I basically was saying, no, I don't want to go back to Earth. I even said, I'm not going back there and you can't make me. And my guides agreed. They said, you're right. We can't make you. But if you do go back to Earth, you'll be able to help some other souls. Would it be okay if we show you some of the souls that you'll be able to help if you go back to Earth? And I was like, okay, I guess we could do that. And so they introduced me to some different souls. And they basically assured me that if I went back to Earth, I would be able to help these souls. And I started thinking, that sounds pretty cool. That would be good. I would like to help these souls. And then I basically said, will I help myself as well? Will I also be able to overcome this current condition I'm in? And they assured me that I would, that I would be able to benefit from coming back to Earth. And so I agreed that we could start looking at the possibilities. What would me coming back to Earth look like? And they showed me a life that they had planned that I could live. And basically, I would be a very angry person. And as I understand it, the life of this person, like their childhood would be very traumatic, or they would have maybe abusive parents. I don't know the details, only that I would become a very angry person, and that my entire life I would be working against that anger and trying to not be violent or just to be calm. And I know from a human perspective, that sounds awful, but from a spiritual perspective, a soul constantly fighting that natural tendency towards anger and violence, it's like constantly lifting weights. You're constantly lifting that weight of exercising calmness and peace, restraint. And so that would help my soul to become more peaceful and restrained and less violent. But I just completely rejected that life. It was not what it was like too difficult for me. I didn't want it. It didn't feel right. And I told my guides, no, I'm not taking that life. I'm not going to do that. And so my guides respected my decision. And so we started looking at some other lives I could leave. So we looked at another set of parents, and basically my guides were like, you could be born to these parents. They're going to have a child and you could be born to them. And so we started looking at what are the possibilities for this life. And as near as I can tell, in some previous life, I had been a violent person. I had hurt some people, but I don't know any details. I don't know what happened. And so I thought if I'm a girl, I will be less prone to violence. I felt like females were just naturally less violent. And so I really wanted to be a female. And we started looking at the females that were available to these parents. And it became obvious that they had the genes for a redheaded child. And I really liked that. I thought, that looks so cool. I want to be a redheaded girl. It's like the ratios of hair colors around the world was all perfectly obvious. And I knew it was a rare hair color. And I really liked the idea of having a rare, unusual hair color that really fit with my personality. And so I thought that sounds great. But we started looking at the details, and it turned out that there weren't really that many redheaded genes that these parents had. And so if I picked to be a redheaded girl, I would have very limited options. And there was something about my personality and the genes available. Like I always would have been an awkward person. I would have had difficulty making friends, and somehow it just wasn't quite the right fit for me. And I would never be able to get married. And so I thought, okay, that's just not quite going to work. And so I thought, okay, let's look at redheaded boys. Maybe that would work. And it was like there's even fewer options for redheaded boys. Somehow the parents didn't have the right genes for that. I could have done that, but it would have been like forcing it. And then you only have a couple options to pick from. And it was like too limiting. And so I thought, okay, let's look at different hair colors. And I don't have to be a redheaded child. And then we started looking at brown-haired boys. And there was just noodles and noodles of opportunities for brown-haired children with these particular parents. And it became clear that being a boy was a better fit for me. Being a male, it just worked better for me. And so we started looking at the details of what sort of options were available. And initially, I wanted to be extremely good looking. I wanted to be like one of the best looking people on the planet. And that option was available to these parents. They had enough of a mix of genes that I could be a really good looking person. And my guide said, okay, they explained, yes, this is an option for you. You can choose this if you want, but here's the downsides of picking that option. You'll be arrogant. Women will treat you differently. And essentially, you're going to be more promiscuous. Like you won't have the self-control necessary to resist certain urges. If women are constantly throwing themselves at you, you're not able to resist that, okay? I don't know how to spell this out more obviously, but the spiritual downside of being overly promiscuous was self-evident. Like it was like right there, I understood it perfectly. And I was like, no, okay, that doesn't work. That's not right for me. That doesn't fit with where I am in my development. And it would be like a spiritual negative for me. So anyway, we backed the attractiveness down to something that was a little bit attractive, but nothing extraordinary. I just turned 50, so I know I'm not that great looking, but when I was younger, my looks matched what I remember picking at that time. Anyway, we reached what we thought was the appropriate level of attractiveness, and then we started looking at intelligence. And again, I wanted to be like the smartest guy on the planet, just absolutely brilliant. And my guides again pointed out, yeah, those options are available to you. You could be that, but here's some of the downsides. Here's some of the problems. You would be very arrogant. And they showed me this. You'd be very arrogant. You would look down on other people because they're not as smart as you. You would be a loner. You would end up being an atheist. You would be not quite a social outcast, but like I would have a ton of trouble relating and being friends with other people. Like it would just be very difficult for me. And essentially I'd be a little bit of a jerk. And there's a huge spiritual downside to all those things that was self-evident in the situation or in the setting. And so again, we backed down my intelligence to intelligent, but nothing extraordinary, just maybe a little bit smart. Nothing to write home about, so to speak. Anyway, we looked at the physical body and we picked all the traits, the look, the height, the hair color, the build, the genetic traits, all of it. All of it we looked at, we picked, or mainly I picked, and they would provide some input here and there. And when we got the body that I felt was appropriate, I was like, okay, this looks like the body I could live in. And my guides pointed out, they basically said, okay, if you pick this body, there's a unintended consequence. As a teenager, based on the genes that you've picked, as a teenager, you'll have really horrible acne. It wasn't intended. It wasn't something I picked, but it was like a side effect of all these other choices. And so we took a closer look at that. What that would be like. I would have really horrible acne for a couple years and then it would go away. And my guides basically pointed out that, it'll actually help you with your spiritual development. It'll be very difficult, but it'll actually help you in a way. And I can't stress enough how short 2 years of frustration, like how short that seemed from a spiritual perspective. Like it seemed like nothing. Okay. Like I was willing to put myself through that to make the life work. And because it would actually help me with my progress, I was like, okay, we'll just go with it. It'll be okay. So once we had the body picked, my guides had a plan for laying out some other details of my life. They basically had people souls they wanted me to help, who would of course be people that I would interact with in life. And so they started arranging some different interactions I would have with other people, some of the relationships I would have. And then we also looked at, there's things I had done in past lives that were going to affect this life. Essentially, it's like I had written a check in past lives and now it was up to me to cash it. Or you could say I had karma from a past life and now I had to experience it. Basically, there are things that I had done in the past and now I needed to receive it. And this wasn't any kind of punishment. This was like a means of education. Like all I was getting was what I had previously given out. And they showed me in multiple situations what I had done previously. They would show me some little scene from a previous life and show exactly what I had done. And then they would show how that was going to be incorporated into this plan for my new life. And one of the most straightforward examples is at one time I had been like a bigger, stronger guy and I beat up this other guy and I really didn't need to. I could have avoided that fight. I was out of line. At the time I felt good. I beat up this guy. He's not respecting me the way he needs to or whatever it was. And I beat him up pretty bad. But now I was going to be on the receiving end. I was going to receive what I had given out. And my guides had it all planned out. And to be perfectly honest, not only was it fair, but I felt like if anything, I was getting off easy. Like they used the best possible light in what I had done previously and combined with the worst possible light of what I was going to receive. And to match it together, I felt honestly, I was being treated very fairly and generously. But they showed a number of different things I had done in the past and how that was going to affect this upcoming life. And then they showed some different relationships and like where I was going to work was all planned out. And some of my interactions with my coworkers, like a lot of this stuff was planned out. They told me that I would always maintain my free will and I could go off script anytime I wanted to, but that somehow they still had a plan for everything. But there was a basic plan for my life and how it would all go that I agreed to. And my strengths were going to help other people and my weaknesses were going to provide challenges for other people. It was like all planned together. It sounds like 1,000 different pieces of spaghetti all wound together. It seems like a big mess, but God understood it all. There was a plan for it. There was a reason. And the reason was for my spiritual development and the spiritual development of all these other people. It wasn't just pointless. There's a very clear purpose for all this. Anyway, when we had the life planned out, we even looked at the name I was going to have. And I was able to help pick the name I was going to get. Because it was the name that I was going to have my entire life, I was able or allowed to exert my willpower a little bit more strongly over my parents to help push them one way or another about picking the name. And I liked my name, Aaron Thomas Green, because it had so many hidden references to my life that there's a lot of little details there that I thought were really cool. And I even got to pick my birthday. I picked a date that had a significant or a reference to a past life that I thought was interesting. I picked it. And anyway, we had all these different things picked, all these different interactions. My guides asked me again, looking at the entire life from a whole viewpoint, are you sure you're willing to do this? Are you sure? And I said, yes, I'm sure. And when I agreed and said, yes, I'm sure, it's like the decision was made and it was set and I was off to live this life. And that kind of that answered the question of, okay, that's how I became Aaron. And so that question was answered. So it was like I was back to floating in my neighbor's yard, just wandering around aimlessly looking at stuff. And I had one more big question was, okay, it's obvious that it's obvious where I started, where I came from, how I became Aaron, but what happens after I leave this life? What happens to souls when they're not on earth? What are they doing between lifetimes? And so I was shown a number of different experiences I'd had between previous lives, like what that looks like. I was shown first some of the bad experiences I'd had between lives. In one realm I had been in between lives, it was like a horrible realm where all the souls there were just fighting with each other. We all looked like monsters and we just fought constantly. We just wanted to hurt and kill those around us, including me. That's what I was. And eventually I stopped trying to hurt those around me. And instead I actually tried to help one of these other beings that I was with. And when I stopped trying to hurt these others, I wanted to help them. It was like an angel swooped down and pulled me up out of this fight that we were all in, and basically told me that once you stop fighting with others, you no longer belong there. And he basically was then going to transition me to come back to Earth and live another life. And I was told that every one of the souls there, every one of them would eventually leave, and that none of them were going to be stuck there forever. I saw this other realm that I had been in between lives where it was like in darkness, and we were all just standing around lost and confused. We didn't know what we were doing. We didn't know why we were there. We didn't understand what was going on at all. And there were some higher level beings, like beings of light, that were going around trying to help us. But we were all mistrustful. We had trouble accepting that these beings were there to help us, and we just were scared. But eventually I accepted help from one of these beings, and basically they helped transition me to begin another life, to continue my progress. And then I saw some happier realms as well. One of the realms I had been in looked very much like Earth. It was just like a medieval city, only the buildings were all like perfectly built. The streets were clean. Everybody there was happy. It was like Earth, but very happy. And then I saw this other realm I had been in. It was like a city of light. It was absolutely beautiful. All the buildings were like a translucent light that you could see through and see into. And the souls there were extremely happy, like very happy. I couldn't even describe it. Anyway, when that question was answered, it's like I was back to floating around in my neighbor's backyard. And I started to have a realization that when I leave this life, when I'm done, I can go transition back to one of these happy levels, and I could be with my friends again. It was like I remembered that I had some really close friends, and that the closeness, the friendship was something just beyond what we have here on Earth. It's like when souls are friends, it's like they can merge together and share themselves with each other in a way that's not possible on Earth. We have the sexual merger, of course, but this is much more intimate and more pleasurable, and it's nothing to do with sex at all. But I remember that I had friends like that, and how wonderful it is to be in that kind of existence. I just wanted to go back to that. I wanted to be back in one of these happy realms. And as soon as I had that realization, this being of light or angel, I say being of light and angels, but nobody was wearing a name tag. They didn't explain exactly who they were to me at a certain time. But it seemed like an angel. It's just a very high level, powerful spiritual being that was made of light, that was absolutely beautiful. I couldn't begin to describe how beautiful this guy was. Extremely beautiful. But anyway, it was like he was in a hurry. He was in a rush. He told me, "You are not to leave your body." And I think he commanded me to look down. And as soon as I looked down, spam, I was back in my body. Excuse me. I stood up. I was confused. I was like, what the heck? What just happened? What was that? I looked back at my friends. At that point, my brother had noticed that I'd been laying there for maybe 30 seconds, and he had started to walk over towards me. Anyway, when I stood up, he just ignored me and went back to play with my friends. But I went home and I tried to explain it to my mother, but I just couldn't at that age. But I would think about this experience every day for months. And maybe 6 or 9 months later, I was just walking around through my house, and I was contacted again, this mind-to-mind communication, and I knew immediately who it was. That telepathic link, it's like a fingerprint. Like I knew exactly who it was. Anyway, it was my guides, and they explained a couple things. One was that because of the experience that I had, I could never develop faith. They told me that like faith is very important. Spiritual, like side effect of having faith here on Earth is like extremely powerful and important. It's really big. And because I had experienced this stuff for myself, and I just knew some stuff about God, I knew that we're all spiritual in nature and we're going to continue to survive after this life, I could never develop faith. It's like I knew too much. And so they wanted to hide my experience from me so that I could develop faith. But they needed my agreement to hide that experience, because they couldn't do it without violating they couldn't hide that knowledge without violating my free will unless I agreed to it. So I agreed to it. I trusted these guides, and they also wanted to alter the plan for my life. Essentially, in order to prepare me for what I had experienced and what I'd been through and what I had learned, they needed to add some extra challenges to help grow me in the appropriate way that I needed, so that I could be ready to handle some of this stuff. And I didn't like it because it meant that my life was going to be more difficult. But I trusted my guides. I knew that they were actually looking out for me, and that this was necessary, like it was needed to make all this stuff work. And they assured me that when I was an adult, I would get all these memories back. But I agreed to it. And then afterwards, I never thought about this experience. Like it was kind of like clean from my memory. And I went through life. I became a teenager. I got really bad acne and had no memory whatsoever that I agreed to that. I remember thinking at one point, God, why do I have this horrible acne? This is terrible. What purpose does this serve? But eventually it got better. And I went through stuff. I had my nose broken. I think I was 12 years old, and I had no idea that was something I had agreed to prior to being born. I dislocated my shoulder, and then later in life, I broke and dislocated my other shoulder. And I didn't have any idea that was something I had agreed to prior to being born. Anyway, I went through life, got married, had kids, and then roughly, I think it was 14 years ago now, I was reading a Newsweek article by Dr. Eben Alexander. He's a neurosurgeon who had a near-death experience. Anyway, something about reading his article, like I believed what he was saying, like I believed his account of his experience. And the way I think this worked is I developed, like I had more faith in God reading his article than I ever had in life because I believed what he was saying. I thought, okay, this is true, what he's telling us. And it like triggered the recall of all these experiences that I hadn't thought about in 30 years. It's like they all came back to me. And I've been trying to process all these memories for the last 14 years and make sense of it. And now I'm just trying to share it with anyone I can, because I think there's some information there that's helpful to anybody who's interested. That's my story, and that's what I experienced.
Aaron, thank you so much. I have a few questions for you. Did it seem that time existed, or did you feel timeless when you were on the other side?
Yeah, as near as I could tell, time just doesn't work the same way on the spiritual realms that it does here on Earth. I did feel like maybe there was a loose connection at the lower levels, but I think as you move up to higher and higher levels, there's less of a connection to time. We exist as timeless entities. It's like time is needed to make life work. It's like it's part of this, what makes this physical reality function properly. But I don't think time is what it seems to be. There's something fundamentally different about it. I can't quite wrap my mind around it, but it's definitely different.
How do you feel that your NDE changed your world or your sense of self?
I feel like we're all in this together. We're all part of the same kind of plan and effort. And the way I see it is it's like we're all little pieces of God and we're all connected to each other through God. And that there's an importance to how we treat each other that I think doesn't get translated, or it's difficult to really express how important that is. And that's how I try to focus my life, is just to be good to others, kindness, compassion, empathy, respect, that kind of stuff. I think it's very important. So my experience has led me to take that stuff very seriously and not worry so much about material stuff, money, houses, fancy clothes or whatever. Like that stuff seems way less important, and just being a decent human being seems way more important.
Has that always been the case for you? Have you always felt that things weren't as important? Do you think that there was ever a time when it was important to you?
Yeah, that's a good question. I'm not sure. I don't think I was ever very materialistic. At one point, I used to think someday I might have a huge house, but now that doesn't seem important at all. So I'm not sure it was ever super important to me, but it definitely feels less important now.
You had a life review, and I was curious if you felt any type of judgment or unconditional love, or did you even feel a little bit scared?
During my life review, I didn't feel judgment. Like I never felt like God was judging me or my guides were judging me. I only felt like they were there to help me. And there was definitely parts where I felt like I was judging myself, perhaps, but that was all internal. And it's like there was times where I felt like maybe I could have done something better or different, or I had made some mistakes. But for the most part, I never felt like anyone else was judging me, that it was just like I was the one who was making a judgment. But having said that, I do feel like at times my guides understood that there was things I had done that I probably shouldn't have done. And my guides, they understood that, but they weren't like judging me about it.
You do hear from others that have the same type of life review, and they feel the same. They don't feel judged. And I think that's important for people to know, because often people are afraid of dying and thinking of that life review as, oh my gosh, I'd rather not. I just want to go straight there and pass the life review. Because people are actually scared of what they might see. So I can completely understand that.
Yeah, I view it as if you picture yourself as an adult watching a bunch of, let's say, 1-year-olds or 2-year-olds on the playground, and some kids running, a 1-year-old, they're running and they fall down. You understand that they fell down and you might try to help them up if needed, but you're not judging them. They're a 1-year-old. That's something they do. That's something that happens. It's not like you harshly look down on them and judge them. Oh, how could they fall down? And I feel like our guides and God and the spiritual side, they look at us the same way. We're like little children floundering around, and they'll help us if they can, but they're not judging us harshly based on what we do and don't do.
Did you ever feel like you were helped throughout your life by the other side or by your guides? Did you ever feel that within you as you got older?
Yeah, I feel like that they periodically work through our conscious or some way like that, some very subtle way. They like point us in the right direction. And if we have a decision to make in life, they might try to direct us to make this decision or that decision. But it's always, we always have free will. So anything that we get from them is like very gentle, and it's not like controlling or trying to force you to do something. It's more like just mild suggestions saying, hey, this way is a better path. This is what you should be doing. So I feel like at times that they might subtly push me one way or another through my conscious, but that's about all I'm able to perceive.
Do you know anybody else that's had an NDE?
Yeah, a couple people. There was one guy I worked with pretty closely for years, and I finally told him about my experience. And it turns out he had a similar experience, which was very surprising to me because I had known him for 15 years. So there's a couple people I know that have had that kind of an experience similar to mine, but not a whole lot.
So having had that wonderful NDE and seeing the creator, how do you perceive life now?
Yeah, I view life as a spiritual kindergarten or boot camp. Like life is an important lesson for us. We're all here to learn. I view it as before we came here to this physical reality, we had no experience. We had no knowledge. We didn't know any kind of idea of what was right or wrong, or that it was bad to hurt other people. Like just the most basic stuff. We didn't understand that at all. And so by coming here to this physical reality, we're able to learn all these concepts that it's like there's a spiritual equivalent to the stuff we learn here on earth that's much more important. And by coming here, we're able to learn very quickly all these priceless lessons that we have to learn before we can really enjoy our existence. So mainly I view Earth as like a spiritual kindergarten or boot camp where we're getting these lessons in very quickly. And then we can move on and really enjoy our existence after we've mastered these basic concepts of treating other people well.
So do you think that when we move on, we move somewhere else out of this life? We're not ever going to enjoy our full existence here? And you think that we maybe go to another Earth-like place?
Yeah, that's a good question. I guess I'm not sure. I think it's different for different people or different souls. I think some souls are they're going to need to come back to Earth, like they haven't mastered some of these basic concepts. Some souls may have mastered all the basic concepts and then they choose to come back to Earth because they want to help others. They could help make the world a better place or help others learn the lessons they need to learn, whatever the case may be. But then when we're done with Earth, I think we're just at the first grade level. We still have so much to learn. I think there's other schools for souls that are higher level, easier, more pleasant. There's all kinds of ways that we could continue our education that aren't quite so harsh the way Earth can be.
So I'm going to dovetail off that because I'm curious to know what you believe about soul, reincarnation, and consciousness.
Yeah, I think we learn through repeated iterations or multiple trips to Earth. I certainly don't think this is my first trip here. And yeah, we come back multiple times, not endless, but a lot more than one. And as we go, what we do in one life, it directly sets the stage for what's going to happen to us in another life. If we mistreat other people, we're prone to get that same kind of mistreatment. If we're good to other people, though, we're prone to reap those benefits for ourselves and enjoy an easier, more pleasant life. But I view it as we go through repeated iterations, and that's how we learn. That's how we progress. And eventually we don't have to do that anymore.
Were there any abilities or sensitivities that increased or decreased when you came back?
I think I try to listen to my conscious more. I think that's the closest thing to an ability. I guess I feel like my guides sometimes try to steer me one way or another. And I think I'm a little bit sensitive to that. And that's the only ability I would say that maybe I have, but I kind of think everybody has that same ability if they just listen to their conscious or they're open for that. There's also like little pieces about other people that like I saw how our lives were planned out. I saw some of that. So I know like little bits and pieces about some other people. This is stuff that I couldn't necessarily tell them, but it's interesting and it totally fits with what else I know about their life. And so sometimes I think that's interesting. There was a coworker, a person I barely knew, I never interacted just a tiny bit on the surface level. And I was like, I remember this person. I know that they were part of my life plan, but I don't understand. It doesn't make any sense because we hardly ever talked with each other. And then there were some changes and some reorganizations and stuff. And then we ended up sitting next to each other for 3 years. And so we talked almost every day. And so I thought that was interesting. And there's other little things like that I think are interesting, but I don't really consider that to be a special ability, just a little bit of insight into some other people.
I have to ask this, but when you met your wife, did you know Did you know she was the one? And were you shown that in any part of your NDE?
So yeah, there was a number of different relationships that were planned out. But remember, my experience was hidden from me when I was 6 years old. And so when I met my wife, got married, had kids, I didn't remember any of my experience. So no, I didn't know the second I saw her that like we were going to get married or anything like that. But now later, now that all these decisions, I've made all these decisions with according to my free will without any kind of understanding about what the plan was. Now I have some insight into some of those past decisions I've made and what sort of plan was going on, why some things were planned out the way they were.
Aaron, do you believe that humanity is evolving spiritually?
Yeah, absolutely. I know that could be really hard for a lot of people to accept when you look at the world or you watch the news and there's so many problems. There's problems everywhere you look. It feels like a mess sometimes. And I totally get that. But I think if you look at history, you look at how things were 1,000 years ago, 2,000 years ago, we've actually made a lot of progress. We really have. And I know it doesn't feel like that sometimes, but yeah, I absolutely think humanity and people are making progress as time goes on. And I view it like if you ever seen a stock market graph, like there's an upward trend, but there's all kinds of, it backslides. And I think humanity and individual souls have that same kind of upward progress, but we have setbacks sometimes.
If you could sum up your NDE message, one message to the world, what would you say?
Yeah, the first part is we're all going to continue to exist after our bodies die. When our bodies die, that's not the end of us at all. And that there's a God that loves us very much and is very much interested in our well-being and happiness. The other part is what's important in life is the basic concepts, the same kind of stuff you learn in kindergarten. We need to act with integrity, kindness, compassion, honesty, forgive other people, try to help other people if we can, have some basic self-control, have respect for others, that kind of thing. Like that stuff is very important. And some of the other stuff that everybody tends to focus on, fame and fortune and clothes and money and houses and cars, that stuff is not really important. It's not going to matter when your body dies. That stuff's not going to matter anymore. But all the stuff I said, the kindness, respect, honesty, integrity, that stuff is going to be very important to us when we move on to the spiritual realms. And so a wise person would do what they can to try to be good to others and try to work on those areas, become a better person. And it'll pay off for anyone who does that. They will be able to reap a greater happiness and a greater enjoyment when they return to the spiritual realms.
I wanted to just circle back for a second because I actually thought of something. Aaron, did you ever have a breathing problem or any issues with your breathing prior to that day?
No, I've never had any kind of asthma or breathing problems. It's never been a real issue for me. It was just that one time with my friends that triggered this experience. It's the only time I've ever had any kind of breathing problem like that. And so it's, I don't know, unusual for me or my life to have any kind of breathing issues like that. It's not really an issue. But somehow there was something on that day that, that was significant enough to trigger this kind of experience for me.
Where you are now and the message that you're sending out to the world, like you give others hope. I absolutely adore that, honestly.
Yeah, there's plenty of people who have ended up in the hospital and had a near-death experience or had some life-altering injury. There's a huge range of different people. Fortunately for me, my experience, it didn't have any lasting impact. I didn't go to the hospital or anything like that. So I guess I feel fortunate that my experience wasn't triggered by some kind of life-altering injuries or something that was incredibly difficult the way a lot of other people get their experiences.
And you never had it happen again?
No, never had that kind of experience since I was a kid.
It was meant to be.
Yeah.
That's what it's like.
The way I view it, there's some level above my guides that they knew what was going on. It was part of a bigger plan that I don't understand, but hopefully I can share these little bits that I saw during my experience, and hopefully that helps people to understand how life works and how God works a little better and allow them to live a better life. Hopefully that's my goal anyway.
Are you afraid of dying now?
No, I don't have any fear of death. The only thing I'm really fearful of is my own ability to do something stupid or to get angry and hurt somebody else. That's the only thing I'm scared of. I just want to keep myself under control and never lash out in anger or mistreat another person or do something wrong like that. That's the only thing that I could really say I'm scared of is my own ability to screw things up. But death, when my time comes, I'm not in any kind of hurry. But when my time comes, I'm going to be fine with leaving this body behind.
That's interesting. Aaron, I want to thank you so much for being here with us today. It's been a real pleasure.
Of course. Yeah. Thank you for having
What's
me.
happening next for you? What's on the agenda next for you?
I have a book I'm working on. The working title is Emerging from the Light. And if anybody wants to get in touch with me, you can reach me at aarongreen1975@gmail.com. Or I have a small YouTube channel where a couple people have asked me questions, so I posted a couple short videos. Emerging from the Light, NDE, Aaron Green. If you look on that on YouTube, I've got a little channel. But if anybody wanted to find me on Facebook or email me, I'm pretty easy to get in touch with. I get questions and comments sometimes, so I reply if I'm able.
We'll have all his details in the link below. Again, Aaron, thank you so much for being here. It has been a real pleasure talking with you and meeting with you.